This episode is brought to you by HASA. Liquid is clearly better. Liquid chlorine is the highest purity, works immediately, has no added cyanuric acid or calcium, and it will leave your pool safe, clean, and clear. And by the Bottom Feeder professional grade battery powered vacuum system. It sucks to clean pools, so cleaning pools sucks less. Get $100 off with code DVB100.
This episode is brought to you by Skimmer, the #1 pool service software in North America. With Skimmer, you can streamline your schedule, grow your revenue, and keep your customers coming back with 5-star service. Whether you're a one-person operation or an established team, Skimmer is your partner in success. Visit getskimmer.com/poolguy to try Skimmer for free for 30 days.
The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show.
Hi, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to talk to you about high pH, ways to lower it, and I'm also going to give you some reasons why your pH may actually appear to be high, but is actually in range in your pool. And I'll explain that in detail so that you're not constantly chasing the pH in a pool. Are you a pool service pro looking to take your business to the next level? Join the Pool Guy Coaching Program. Get expert advice, business tips, exclusive content, and get direct support from me. I'm a 35-year veteran in the industry. Whether you're starting out or scaling up, I've got the tools to help you succeed. Learn more at swimmingpoollearning.com. And let me start by saying that the ideal pH ranges that you see online, the 7.2 to 7.6, may not be actually ideal for your pool condition. And I'll explain that, and I'll give you some concrete examples right now, because a lot of times you're going to be taking care of a saltwater pool. The pH is going to be constantly at 8 or 8.2, sometimes even 8.4. Because the saltwater generator, one of the byproducts of it producing chlorine in the pool is that it raises the pH. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this, but there is a side effect with the generator. Also, there's a lot of turbidity in the saltwater cell itself, and this causes the pH to go up. If you have water features, they're going to contribute to the high pH because, as you know, probably from any kind of online search on rising pH, you're going to hear about aeration. And aeration is a way to raise the pH in the pool water, either with the return jet pointing up or with these water features running. And this automatically raises the pH in the pool just because it's aerating the water, and the water features are a big contributor to this, also the saltwater generator. But if you have a salt pool and the pH is at 8.0 and you want to try to bring it down to like 7.4, you can try that, but you're going to have a constant battle with the pH. And is it really necessary to drop the pH down to that level? And I'll argue right now that it actually is not necessary to be chasing the pH and to drop a pH in a salt pool down to 7.4. I'll give you a practical example here using the Orenda calculator, LSI calculator, I should say. Now, if you don't have this on your phone, you can also use it on your computer. The easiest way to get the LSI calculator is to go to my website, swimmingpoollearning.com, scroll down to the very middle of the homepage, and you're going to see the Orenda app LSI calculator tab there. Click on that. That'll take you to the calculator. And you can also put that on your Android or iPhone as well. And so let me give you this practical example of how a pH of 8 actually is perfectly fine according to the LSI. Now the LSI, there's a green range, which is 0.00 to plus 0.30. And this is the ideal range that you can keep the pool in. And this means that it's not going to be scale forming or corrosive to the pool. Now, if it's in the purple range, it's going to be scale forming. And if it's in the red range, it's going to be aggressive and even destroy the plaster of the pool and cause damage to the equipment. So is a pH of 8 going to cause scaling in the pool? Possibly. But here is a scenario that's pretty typical of a saltwater pool in Southern California. And actually, a pH of 8 is actually within range here. It's coming in at 0.21, which is in the green range. And I'll give you the other factors that contribute to this and make a pH of 8 a non-factor in some saltwater pools. You could do this yourself too if you have the calculator, and I'll wait a second so you can run the calculator open on your cell phone or desktop. So if you, again, get the run the calculator, why don't you put these numbers in along with me? Put the water temperature at 80 degrees, put the pH at 8, drop the alkalinity down to 60. You can even put it at 70 if you want. I'll leave it at 60 here. Put the calcium hardness at 400, which is pretty typical for pools here in California. You can go a little lower if you wanted to. Let's say you want to go to 350. Let's just make the argument to go to 350, which is a fair calcium hardness level again in my area. And let's bring the cyanuric acid level, let's bring that to 50 parts per million. And let's put the TDS or salt level at 3200. And then you're going to see that it is actually a perfect LSI, which you don't get very often, but the LSI is actually at 0.00. And again, water temperature is 80, pH is at 8, alkalinity is at 60, calcium hardness is at 350, cyanuric acid is at 50, and the TDS, because it's a saltwater pool, is at 3200. And you're going to get a perfect LSI with the pH at 8. Now, if you drop the pH down to 7.4 like you wanted to do, let's say, again, these are all the numbers here, and you should be using the LSI calculator, in my opinion, in your pool surface so that you can see if the water is, again, scale forming or And the Pool Guy Podcast Show has teamed up with UPA to bring you affordable, reliable liability insurance starting at just $64 a month. Get up to $2 million in coverage, and the members of my coaching group get an even lower rate. Protect your business and your peace of mind. Sign up with UPA today by clicking the link in the podcast description. Corrosive. So let's say you drop it down to 7.4 because the online readings or the online recommendations, I should say, are 7.2 to 7.6, and you drop that pH down to 7.4. Well, what happens to the LSI now? All the other numbers stay exactly the same that I had in here, but now you're at a negative 0.56, which is aggressive, which is interesting because you think that an 8.0 is going to be scale forming pH-wise, but when you drop it down in a saltwater pool, it's actually going to be corrosive at that point. So be very careful that when you're doing this, and I can also change the temperature here, and this will make it even worse because let's say the water is in the let's say the water is 68 degrees right now, and you're doing this to the pool to bring the pH down to 7.4. Water temperature is a big factor in the LSI as well. This is actually a negative 0.65, so it's even worse at this point. And if you bring the pH up to 8.2 at this point, with the water temperature at 68 degrees, you're actually back in the green. So this is kind of complicated in a way, but not really if you think about it. Think about all the other factors that contribute to if the pool water is corrosive or scale forming. Now granted, if you had the pH at 8, I'm going to bring the water temperature back up to 80 degrees here. And I'm going to drop the calcium hardness level down to somewhere where it may be in Florida. I'm going to bring it down to 200, which is, something that sometimes happens in certain states where the water is softer. Now, if you're at 200 calcium hardness, and now you're at negative 0.23, which is acceptable, but you're still kind of getting into a corrosive, aggressive kind of range here. And that's with the pH at 8 and the calcium hardness at 200. Now, of course, if you wanted to bring the pH down in this pool, and you kind of understand that the calcium hardness is somewhat of a buffer to the pH in a way. I wouldn't call it a pH buffer, but it is a buffer in the LSI in my opinion, because if the calcium hardness is low, 200, and the pH is at 7.4, and the alkalinity is also at 60, you're going to be at a negative 0.79, which is something that can etch and damage the pool. So be careful here when you're chasing pH, and know that maybe lowering the pH in certain situations is not the ideal thing. Now, of course, if the calcium hardness is at 350 again, and you have the alkalinity a little higher, let's say the alkalinity is at 90, or let me bring the alkalinity to 100 just for sake of argument. And then the TDS, of course, you don't have a salt pool, so let's bring the TDS down to a normal number of, let's say, 1400. Now, TDS is something that a lot of pool pros don't check for, and you should be checking for it with a digital meter, and it is part of the LSI, which is important. But if the TDS is at 1300, the cyanuric acid is at 50, let me bring the cyanuric acid up to 100, which does happen in a lot of pools here in California. And you have the pH at 7.4, you have the total alkalinity at 100. You're still in the yellow range, almost going into the aggressive range. So you would want to bring the pH up, of course, to about 7.8, and then you're back into the green. So here we are, 7.8, alkalinity at 100, calcium hardness at 350, cyanuric acid at 100, and TDS at 1300, and you're in the green range. Again, the pH is at 7.8. So the old school thinking of keeping the pH between 7.2 and 7.6 really does not work effectively. Now, of course, a pH of 8 can be a problem, or 8.2. I'm going to just say 8.2 here. You can put these numbers in as well, and you'll get an idea of how this can be scale forming. You'll see the white calcium build up on the pool. Maybe the walls will be rough as well because you're going to have calcium build up. But if the water temperature is at 80, the pH is at 8.2, your total alkalinity is at 100, your calcium hardness is 350, and the cyanuric acid is 100, and your TDS is 1300, then you're going to be scale forming at 0.49. And simply by lowering the pH in this case, you're actually going to get back into the green range by bringing the pH down to 7.8. And I said 7.8 because if you bring it down to 7.4, you're heading into the yellow range, which can be corrosive to the pool. It's really interesting, and it's something to note when you're adjusting pH in the pool, that a pH of 7.2 may not be ideal, or 7.4, and a pH of 7.8 or 8.0 may be perfectly fine. One thing I should note about the Orinda calculator, one thing you should know is that there is something called carbonate alkalinity or adjusted alkalinity that some people refer to, and this is the cyanuric acid does contribute to this factor, and the Orinda app actually calculates your adjusted alkalinity or carbonate alkalinity automatically. So that's a nice feature. So as the cyanuric acid goes up in the pool, it'll automatically adjust the carbonate alkalinity for you. So you have an idea of, basically the alkalinity based on the cyanuric acid, which affects the alkalinity in the pool. So carbonate alkalinity, you can of course go into detail, and if you're actually in the app, you can actually click on these buttons, and the Orinda, it'll take you to articles on the Orinda site about the adjusted alkalinity factor, and this is an important thing. What are some ways to keep the pH from rising rapidly in the pool? Of course, I mentioned the water features at the beginning. They contribute to pH going up. Keeping the alkalinity lower in the pool also helps the pH from rising rapidly, I should say. So having a lower alkalinity is better if you want to keep the pH from bouncing up fast in the pool. And this may be something you want to control so that you're not putting a lot of muriatic acid in the pool, because in a saltwater pool especially, you're going to be adding a lot more acid to bring the pH down to even 8, because it's going to be sometimes at 8.4 in a new plaster pool as well. Since it has a high acid demand, you're going to be adding a lot of muriatic acid in that case as well to keep the pH within range. Now, I'm not saying you don't need to worry about the pH range at all and worry about chasing pH. There is some aspects where the pH is too high in the pool and it will cause scaling in the pool. And of course, this is the white scale on the tile, which naturally will occur over time anyway, but you can control some of that by keeping the pool from being scale forming. And a lot of times the pool plaster will get rough and have calcium buildup because you're not really watching the pH and it's at 8.2, 8.4, over 8 all the time. And some of these other numbers like the alkalinity and calcium hardness will contribute to it to being in the purple range on the Orinda app or scale forming. So keep that in mind as well, that the pH is important. But again, having it at 7.4 is not something that may be ideal in your pool situation. So having a lower alkalinity will keep the pH from rising rapidly. One really effective way to keep the pH from rising rapidly in the pool is to add a secondary buffer. some people may call it a third buffer, because I mentioned that cyanuric acid acts somewhat as a buffer as well. And then you have the alkalinity as your primary buffer, which means that if the alkalinity is at 160 or 180, it's going to neutralize a lot of the acid you put into the pool. So you're going to need to add more acid more often to bring the pH down, because the alkalinity at 180 is buffering it and making it less acidic. If the alkalinity is down at 60 or 70, then that means that there's not as much buffer there. And that's why when you add the acid to the pool, it's not being buffered as much. Cyanuric acid does act as a buffer as well. But one of the great buffers that you can add to the pool as a secondary or third buffer, depending on how you look at it again, is borates to 50 parts per million. Borates are a pH buffer as well, which means that the pH will rise slower in the pool with borates at 50 parts per million. It's also an algistat, so you're not going to have algae forming in the pool. But I do like the fact that borates act as another buffer for the pH, and this will help you control it, so you're not adding a lot of acid, and it may be very stable in your pool at 7.8 or 8.0. But it is interesting that if you go online and you're looking at your pH recommendations and you see the ideal pH range, I would caution you to also use the LSI calculator. The Arenda one, I think, is by far the best LSI calculator on the market, and it's free to use, so that's another reason why you should be using it. But I just would caution you when you go looking on sites, or even Googling it or going to chat, you're not going to get an accurate assessment, because they're not really using the LSI calculator to help you calculate how much acid to put in the pool. And especially in cold water, you want to be very careful if the water is in the 60s, even sometimes in the 70s, that you're not lowering the pH too much in there. Because again, as I mentioned, and I'll mention this again, temperature is a pretty big factor in your LSI numbers. And the cooler the water, the greater effect lower pH has on the pool being aggressive, and it could be damaging to the pool. Now, of course, very, very low pH also causes problems with swimmers, the burning of the skin and the itching of the eyes. It can also be the same with high pH, so be aware of the fact that the pH gets too high in the pool. This could also be a similar problem you're having. But I would urge you to get the LSI calculator from Arenda and just play with some numbers. And of course, you can, if you have a pool that you want to actually put the actual numbers into and use it with, you should be doing that. But it's always good to play with it a little bit to see where you can get an idea of where the pH should be in the pool. And as you do this often, it becomes almost second nature. And Bob Lowry is pretty famous for saying this. It's like, I don't really use an LSI calculator because I can do it in my head. Well, of course, he's a grandmaster chemist, and he didn't have to worry about putting numbers in, but you can also get an idea and have a general sense while you're out there of what's scale forming and what's corrosive in the pool. I mean, if the pool pH is at 8 and the alkalinity is at 140, calcium hardness is at 400, cyanuric acid is at 100, TDS is at 1200, you're going to have a pool that's scale forming. It's just something you can figure out without having to put the numbers in. And on the opposite spectrum, if the pH is at 7.2, the alkalinity is at 60, the calcium hardness is at 250, the cyanuric acid is at 100, and your TDS is around 1100. It's going to be an extremely corrosive and aggressive water that's in the pool, and this is something that you can figure out just by learning the LSI, and you can have these kind of numbers floating in your head at some point, and you may not even need a calculator to do all this. You'll know right away that, hey, this pool is really corrosive. I got to bring the pH up right away. And of course, that's one way to solve it, by bringing the pH up. And if you bring it up to 8, you're already in the safe zone. So things to note. And I know it's a lot of kind of information that may be over some people's heads, but really play with that calculator that I mentioned, the Arenda calculator, and you'll get an idea that chasing pH or trying to keep it within 7.2 or 7.4 may not work for that particular pool, and you're just wasting your time and maybe even causing damage to the pool by constantly chasing the pH, wanting a low pH in the pool. If you're looking for other podcasts, you can find those pretty easily by subscribing to my YouTube channel. Monday through Friday, I post a new episode. And of course, on the podcast site, if you go to my website, swimmingprolearning.com, there'll be an icon at the top, and there's a drop-down menu of other podcasts I've recorded. And if you're interested in the coaching program that I offer, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week. God bless. This episode is brought to you by HASA, providing products that deliver clean, healthy water for every aspect of everyday life. The bottom feeder battery-powered vacuum system, portable, powerful, and only weighs 12 pounds. And Skimmer. Get Skimmer, America's #1 pool service software. Podcast listeners can try Skimmer for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.